Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today is 3/30/2020, and today we're going to be going over some very important things like Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci was recently interviewed by Dr. Mike. In fact, yesterday, Dr. Fauci was interviewed by Dr. Mike on his overall plan. That is a proposed plan. His opinion is not policy until the president says that it's policy. And his opinion sometimes is not policy until the Senate says that it's policy. Dr. Fauci has offered his opinion on a good number of topics of late. And so I had a particular reaction to some of the things that he had to say, and I'm going to give you all my reactions to these. But the way that this is set up is I have the video loaded up, and I'm going to play the video. The interviewer, Dr. Mike from New York City, published this on YouTube, and I will be playing the video and stopping the video and commenting as Dr. Fauci gives his responses. So let's go to the video.
Hey guys, we're incredibly lucky today to have Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the director of the Allergy and Infectious Disease branch of the NIH. You may have seen him on stage with Trump as he's part of the coronavirus task force. He's going to be answering some of our questions today. Let's get right to it.
Dr. Mike, how are you?
How's it going?
Running around like a maniac here, but other than that, I'm good.
I can only imagine. I heard your wife was forcing you to get at least 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I'm proud of her for doing that.
Yeah, 4 hours is all I'm doing, but she's the one that's doing it. She's the one that's doing it.
All right, fair enough. Well, first of all, let me say a huge thank you for joining us on the YouTube channel. Everyone in the YouTube community really appreciates what you're doing. My whole channel is about fact-checking, putting out accurate info, and you've essentially become the face for that. So huge thanks from all of us for that. Let's start by talking about social distancing. It's something that I've explained to my...
Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to set this up here with the PhD scientist grading Dr. Fauci on Unbreaking Science. And the first thing that we're going to grade him on is his overall plan. Okay, so Dr. Mike has brought up the topic of social distancing.
Audience, that's incredibly important. That's how we control the spread of this virus, the run on hospitals. There's been a lot of talk recently about curtailing that. I'm curious not so much about the date because, as you said, the virus doesn't have a timeline. What is the yardstick that we're going to be using to measure when it may be safe to curtail the social distancing? Is it number of those who are ill, fatalities, hospital preparedness? What say you?
Well, it's a combination of things, and it's going to be different through different regions of the country because you can't look at it as unidimensional. I mean, New York is clearly different from Washington, and it's clearly different from Alabama. But the indirect answer to your question.
Okay, so right there, what we're going to do is we're going to go back and see what he said, that the different parts of the country need different solutions. And this is absolutely dumbfounding. The reason why he's saying this is because his overall plan, for some reason, always inevitably leads to room for a vaccine as part of our solution. And I'll spell out why that. But clearly different, no. People who test negative in New York are not different from people who test negative in Alabama. His priorities are way, way, way messed up. He wants to do vaccination, and he'll talk about testing a little while. And we're going to talk and have talked about the problems with coronavirus vaccines. But he's saying that there's a geographic variation with respect to the plan because there's different levels of infection right now. Dr. Fauci apparently doesn't understand, like most of the American public, and most of my frustration over the last 2 weeks, I've been on this since January, and I've been doing broadcasts about this and writing articles. Dr. Fauci clearly doesn't understand the power of something that doubles every 3 days. The number of cases and the number of deaths are doubling every 3 days. So it's just a matter of time before Alabama is just like New York City. I don't know. I haven't done the math to do the prediction. But by the time that a policy is put in place where they're rolling people back out of Alabama, okay, they're rolling people back because, well, there's not so many cases in Alabama because the population density is low. So we're going to have to treat New York differently because Alabama is different, or Alabama, no, listen. Fauci's applying population science to a situation that needs individualized medicine. We need to upgrade public health policy where we look at the individual as the central unit. We have So much modern technology. We have computers, computer algorithms, tracking systems, free tracking systems. The free tracking systems that are out there are vastly superior than anything the CDC has put out in terms of tracking. Vastly superior. So, he's about to tell you something about the kinetics of the outbreak. I'm going to let him do it, and then I'm going to grade him on it. But right now, it's in saying that we need different plans in different parts of the country. That's because you're not putting testing first. Let's get back to the video.
You look at two things. You look at the kinetics of the outbreak when you're in the middle of an outbreak. So once it starts reaching that point of plateauing a bit and coming down, you don't want to stop the social distancing, but you may be able to relieve the restrictions on movement in order to get basic supplies to people so that they're not just locked.
Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that again. I want you to hear what he just said. This is very disturbing. Listen to what he's talking about here.
Of the outbreak when you're in the middle of an outbreak. So once it starts reaching that point of plateauing a bit and coming down, you don't want to stop the social distancing, but you may be able to relieve the restrictions on movement in order to get basic supplies to people so that they're not just locked down. If you have an area.
Okay, excuse me? There is no way anyone in the United States is not going to have basic supplies. If there are, then you haven't done your job for the past 30 years. First of all, you look at the kinetics of the plateau, the outbreak, when you're in the middle of the outbreak, look at the kinetics of the outbreak. Once it reaches a plateau, what fucking plateau are you talking about? This is absolute la-la land. The curves are doing this and nothing but this, okay? Look at the data. Every day, Dr. Fauci, look at the data and stop talking about a plateau. There is no plateau. I have not seen any plateau. We're all social distancing, but we're doing it American style. People are still going out to grocery stores. Nobody has told the American public what the Chinese did. The Chinese put things down. Now, first of all, I want to say, I am not for mandatory anything. Everybody knows that, who knows me and knows what I've been up to for the past 3 years. I am pro-choice. I am pro-freedom. I am pro-independence. I am absolutely pro-constitutional rights. But what I'm about to tell you is information that you are not being told by your government about how China did it. Okay? And this is your government speaking to you. Dr. Fauci is your government. He's talking about once it reaches a plateau. What fucking plateau? He's so out of touch with reality. He's referencing some hypothetical future. We need to know what the plan is now. We need a plan now. Okay? If you plot the number of cases and you plot the number of deaths and you plot my measure, which is the effective R naught, it is not good. We're still doubling every 3 days. The other thing that I want to talk about here is well, first of all, let's get to the Chinese solution. What China did was a combination of lockdown, yes, but it was not optional. And that means a restriction of personal freedoms and rights. But even the Chinese said, okay, everybody has to eat, so we're going to let people out of their houses to go get groceries once or twice a week if a person doesn't have symptoms. That's what the Chinese did. He's talking about restrictions so we can relieve restrictions where you can't get out of your house to get basic needs. That's not going to happen. People are going to leave their house to get basic needs. I don't know what... This man is so out of touch. It is totally unacceptable. To relieve restrictions to people to get basic supplies so people are not just locked down, I'm not sure why he said that. I want everybody to calm down. I know I'm excited. I'm upset over this reaction. I was much more upset yesterday, okay, over this. No. When you're locked down, if you're restricted from getting basic supplies, your government has failed you, and that's the time you just go out and get your stuff. You just go out and do what you got to do. No mother, father is going to let their child die from starvation because the government says you have to stay in the house and your child can't eat. There will be access to basic supplies through neighbors, access to basic supplies through, sorry to say it, through the National Guard. That's their job. In a disaster. We are in denial. The United States has a severe case of disaster denial right now. If you see National Guardsmen on your street distributing food, they're not there to take your guns, okay? No one's going to prevent households from getting food or any other essential, and this is really, really bad. And any public health official that says that it's even a remote possibility is way out of touch. Okay, so in terms of that topic, I'm going to give him an F. All right. Now he's about to tell you something else that also deserves an F. As a scientist, this was really weird to hear him say this.
There's very few cases. What you want to do is you want to test a lot in that area to get a feel for what the penetrance of the virus is. And when you get an individual case, you want to immediately identify it, isolate it, contact trace it, and get it out of society. If you do that efficiently, you may be able to open up that community because you're doing good containment. You know, the two major pillars are containment.
Okay, that would have been nice last month. That would have worked last month. I'm saying right here, right now, on March 30th, that it's too late for that. The CDC's test was flawed. CDC shipped a flawed test, okay? And I want you all to go to the other Unbreaking Science episode and look at this, the Ending the Pandemic Part 1, the CDC's Deadly Testing Fiasco. Watch that video, and I'm not going to spend time on that today. I already did a thorough review of CDC's testing fiasco and Anthony Fauci's role in minimizing the public's perception of the fact that the CDC really, really totally messed up by having, first of all, they wanted their own test. There was a test available from Germany. It was already validated. There was a peer-reviewed publication that was a manuscript anyway, and now it's been accepted, January 16th. Okay, go over that video shows all the evidence. CDC wanted their own test so that they could maintain their position of primacy in an area where we have 50 states, we have thousands of companies, we have thousands of public health officials, tens of thousands of scientists at universities who can do what the CDC does better. Okay, so what Fauci just said was we're going to test in an area to get a feel for what the penetrance of the virus is. We already know what the penetrance of the virus is. We already know that from China. We already know it from Italy. We already know it from about 100 other countries. We know what this virus does. We don't need to get a feel for anything. If you're a scientist, you're not about feelings. If you're a scientist, you're about data, hard data, decisions, and in this case, how we react and what we do. Because how we react and what we do means everything. Fauci's plan is to go in and sample some area and get some data to get a feel for what the penetrance of the virus is. By the time they're done analyzing the data, it'll be 6 days. Give them 6 days. It will have doubled and then doubled again. He's on Mars. I have no idea where this guy is coming from. This is inappropriate. It's irresponsible. Okay, so he talks about testing in a little bit in a different manner. So I think what he's done right now is he's just trying to establish that he knows what he's talking about. But in doing so, he shows that he's out of touch with reality. To talk about the plateau, you're approaching the plateau, and then you do, contact tracing, everything else. What contact tracing are you talking about? Get real, okay? There are people. There's 160 healthcare professionals that are in isolation right now at a major local hospital system near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm not going to mention the name because I don't need the lawsuit, and I don't need for them to come ask me who told me this, okay? But 160 are locked down just from one hospital because a nurse went to a St. Patrick's Day party and then came to work with symptoms, and they let her work and she had symptoms, and then they sent her home but refused to test her. The testing is not happening. Let's get our head out of our ass here, okay? This is a problem. We did not have a test. There's not enough tests. I know there's 18 tests that have been created by companies. There's one in Colorado that's an antibody test. Apparently gives a result in about 5 minutes. In South Korea, there's one test that gives a result in 15 minutes. And LA County has said, screw you to the CDC and ordered 20,000 tests from South Korea. They're not waiting for the CDC. Okay. I really think he's just kind of flexing who he is right now and saying, we got to get a feel for the penetrances, and, that he has some special knowledge that the others don't. No, he doesn't have special knowledge. He's calling for what, a 3-week study? 2-week, whatever. Every 3 days, these things are doubling, and people do not understand what that means. And so I'm going to break it down for you. If I give you a quarter today, and you have to pay me back tomorrow with doubling the interest, you double it 50 cents, you double it again, it's $1. Do that 10 times and see where we're at, okay? People have to understand what an exponential process is, and they don't. And we're really, really not thinking about this. Now he says if you find a case, you want to identify, isolate, contact and trace, and get it out of society. Great. Go ahead and do that. Start doing that, Tony. FDA, CDC, start doing exactly that. Let's see some contact tracing done now, where you have, so many cases right now in the United States. Let me look at, if you do that efficiently, he goes, okay, if you do that efficiently, but that's only possible with an accurate test, and CDC screwed us over on an accurate test by shipping out an inaccurate test. And it's really only most effective in the early stages. He's lying to the public yesterday by saying this is what you do during this outbreak. No, you don't. I want to know where the contact tracing is going. If you know where contact tracing is going on, you got public health officials knocking on doors saying, hey, were you exposed to this person? You let me know, because I don't think that that's happening. Okay? We're in dire straits. Okay? Absolute dire straits. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Where you try to stop the spread. And the other is mitigation. When you say, oh my goodness, it's here, what are we going to do to prevent it from getting worse?
Do you think that there would...
Yep, it's here, Tony. That's the message I have for you today. Dr. Fauci, it is here. And it is time that we start acting like it is here. Okay, I've been at this for a long, long time, and I've been writing articles on how to end the epidemic, how to end the pandemic, all right? Right now, there's 142,793 cases in the United States reported. If you correct for those that are undetected using the Chinese correction factor of 86% were undetected during their outbreak, we're over 1 million cases in the United States today.
Any conditions where you think politicians may act too soon and start saying, let's start opening up some of these restrictions? What would happen in a red alert type scenario like that?
Well, I think that would be unfortunate, and that's the thing that we advise against. If you do open up to...
Okay, here we go. So I have this plan where we're going to let your society, we're going to let Alabamans go, and the governor apparently followed the lead of Dr. Fauci and said that she's not going to shut anything down in Alabama. So that means that the virus will spread until the point where they need to shut it down. I predict Alabama will be shut down, in 3 days, 6 days? Then she'll be saying I made a mistake. But she won't then say, thank you, Dr. Fauci, for misleading me to open up Alabama. You see, you got to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So you're opening up a community to what? To COVID-19 spread. Okay? I'm telling America right now, you bring these communities back online without in-home testing, and they will eventually be shut down again. And I'm also saying it's more disruptive to bring communities back online, to open up businesses and bring out the resources and try to get business going again, and then 3 or 6 days later have to shut it down. Okay? I'm arguing to stay the course with social distancing and physical distancing, and you'll see why he's saying that we should open up communities, even if it leads to shutting them down.
You could have the perverse effect that as it's going this way, then it starts going back up.
Sure.
And then you essentially compound the need for the kind of things, respirators, ventilators, hospital beds, ICU, things like that.
You've talked a little bit about seasonality, the possibility that this virus may go away for the summer, may return in the fall, certainly not a definite. But if that were to happen, what preparations can we take as ordinary citizens for the fall? And myself as someone who's on the front lines as a family medicine doctor, what can we do?
Okay. First of all, if that happens, and to be honest with you, I think it's going to happen, I really don't see something as robustly transmitted as this disappearing the way SARS did, particularly if we start to see an increase in infections in the southern hemisphere, southern Africa, places like that,
Alabama,
now as they enter their winter, which means for sure a cycle will come back. That means that as we go down in our cases, we've got to use that time to prepare that it doesn't happen to us to the extent that it did the first time around. That's why we've got to do that.
Okay, so Anthony Fauci needs to open up his web browser. He needs to go to Google and he needs to type in what scientists are saying about seasonality. All scientists that I've seen say anything about seasonality say that there is not only no data to support seasonality, but the evidence is that it's not going to be seasonal because it's spreading at the same time in the northern hemisphere as countries in the southern hemisphere. Okay? So there does not, it's worse that he's not paying attention to, like, there's a lack of evidence and we don't know, and that he's basing his expectation on what's happened with past things. It's not going to be like SARS and go away before we can get the vaccine on the market. That's what happened. It went away through contact tracing, through testing. CDC website says they had a test for SARS back in 2003, and they did extensive testing and they shut it down. And yet they couldn't produce an accurate test in 2020? 17 years later? Did they forget how to do it? All right, he's about to give away why he's biased towards misinforming the public on seasonality.
Vaccine development that we're doing, we've got to do clinical trials in drugs, randomized controlled trials that prove things work, as opposed to maybe they're going to work. Those are the things that we need to do.
I stepped on that.
As well as disappearing the way SARS did, particularly if we start to see an increase in infections in the southern hemisphere, southern Africa, places like that, now as they enter their winter, which means for sure a cycle will come back. That means that as we go down in our cases, we've got to use that time to prepare that it doesn't happen to us to the extent that it did the first time around. That's why we've got to do the vaccine development that we're doing.
There it is.
We've got to do clinical trials in drugs.
Hang on, there it is. That's why we have to do vaccines first. Vaccines first. Now, listen to what he has to say about clinical trials and drugs, okay? He's all about vaccines and knowing that so-called immune enhancement that I call pathogenic priming. You know, let me take a minute and talk where this word immune enhancement came from. Was that when SARS came out and they vaccinated kids. No, sorry, it was the respiratory syncytial virus, the RSV virus. When the RSV virus vaccine came out, they vaccinated kids and they started dying. And they called it enhanced RSV disease. They didn't call it immune enhancement. So what we should be calling immune enhancement from a vaccine, we should be calling it enhanced SARS disease, enhanced COVID disease, okay? Not immune enhancement. Immune enhancement is where you get your vitamin C, you get your sunlight, sunshine, exercise. That's immune enhancement. So we need to undo this kind of like they stole that phrase. But let's hear what Dr. Fauci now has to say next about therapeutics.
Appearing the way SARS did, particularly if we start to see an increase in infections in the southern hemisphere, southern Africa, places like that, now as they enter their winter, which means for sure a cycle will come back. That means that as we go down in our cases, we've got to use that time to prepare that it doesn't happen to us to the extent that it did the first time around. That's why we've got to do the vaccine development that we're doing. We've got to do clinical trials in drugs, randomized controlled trials that prove things work, as opposed to maybe they're going to work. Those are the things that we need to do, as well as get the kind of testing capabilities.
All right, we're going to talk about randomized clinical trials in drugs, okay? Hold on, Tony. The Chinese have an expert consensus statement from the leading medical physicians throughout their country, okay, with experience, far more experience with this disease than you have. And their consensus is start using antivirals, including hydroxychloroquine. And the FDA just allowed the emergency use today. It's emergency use authorization of hydroxychloroquine. So the Michigan governor, who's a Democrat, who showed how ignorant she is, where she said that any doctors in Michigan that use hydroxychloroquine phosphate, that she's going to shut them down. Too bad. FDA just approved of it. Okay? This is a race between shutting this down in time to save lives, get our economy back in line, and making sure that there's enough cases long enough so that NIAID and Moderna can get their vaccine out. That's what's happening here, okay? Now, he calls for randomized clinical trials for a drug that's only been in use for, 80 years? With tons and tons of safety trials. There's a lot of people who are new on my social media accounts saying, oh my gosh, this drug is dangerous, this drug is... Okay. Yes, every drug has side effects, but there already are safety trials, and we know the safety, we know the side effects. Those side effects can be communicated. It's okay for off-label use. We didn't need emergency use authorization. Off-label use of any drug is allowed, unless it's specifically prescribed, okay? So, also, Tony, science is not about proof, but that's a lecture for another day. Okay, randomized clinical trials. Since when has Tony Fauci given a fuck about randomized clinical trials? We've been calling for randomized clinical trials for vaccines for years and years and years. Okay, so at the beginning, you have tiny little randomized clinical trials that last 4 to 5 days, maybe a few weeks. The long-term clinical trials, where are those? Now you want science? Now you want science to shut down therapeutics, to stop saving lives with therapeutics. Okay, so that there's room in the clinical workspace for your vaccine. Let's demand long-term randomized clinical trials for a vaccine, Tony. Double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trials to see if vaccines work and are safe, to prove that they're working, that they're safe, and that we're not seeing pathogenic priming all over the place. And in this case, Dr. Fauci is party to a highly unethical clinical trial that's going on right now in Seattle. It has people in the crosshairs of pathogenic priming, aka immune enhancement, for coronavirus disease, because Moderna and NIAID and this is HHS, I presume signed off on this, did not want to wait for animal studies. What people need to realize is that the animal studies that show enhancement of serious acute respiratory syndrome disease, the so-called immune enhancement, this pathogenic priming, the priming of animals and people injected with a vaccine against a spike protein-based vaccine against SARS, those were using the spike protein. And the rationale that Moderna put forward, that this is not going to be a problem, and that Tony Fauci put forward that this is not going to be a problem, is because they're using a spike protein, not the whole virus. The studies that I read use the spike protein. Okay? So here, Tony's putting vaccines first. Again, vaccines first, more important than testing, more important than therapeutics, and most important of all. And his personal agenda needs to be swept aside and let the United States do what other countries have done who have beat this virus, who are beating this virus, like South Korea, without a vaccine. What are they doing? Okay, F- right here on this topic here for Tony. Let's go on.
So that you can do good containment without waiting until it gets into mitigation. We may have a window, and it's not going to be over. We're going to breathe a sigh of relief when it starts to go down, but we need to gird ourselves that it may come back.
You mentioned the clinical trials. There's hundreds of clinical trials going on right now, testing all sorts of combinations. Remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, even plasma transfusions are all on the table. I know that we don't have any randomized controlled results yet. Do you have a medication or a treatment that you think is a front runner at this time?
Well, we have a remdesivir trial, that we do have a randomized controlled trial, and I would hope that within the next couple of months or less, and I would say or less, we're either going to get an efficacy signal, then we can say, well, let's do it, let it rip with that drug, or we're going to get nothing. And then we'll say, get it off the table and stop wasting time.
Sure.
But I think that's going to be reasonably soon.
Okay.
And also,
he wants to wait a month. The FDA just told him to go away. Here's your papers. Take a hike. We're not waiting for your trial, at least for hydroxychloroquine. The remdesivir trial is ongoing. They should publish results in real time. It takes about 24 hours to see a positive effect from these drugs if they work. Why does it take a month? They've got plenty of cases. They can just talk about they can publish the results in real time. We live in 2020, not 1960. Okay? Why? Because he wants to leave space for a vaccine. This is awful. America's addiction to vaccines may make us the laughing stock of the scientific community abroad. But worse than that, our addiction to vaccines, this easy one-size-fits-all potential solution to make the problem go away, which it does, and it causes so many other problems. It could cost us our economy. So, Anthony Fauci, sit down, go home, go spend time with your wife, go hang out with her, okay? We understand that you don't like therapeutics because they get in the way of a vaccine. But what the fuck? These are FDA-approved drugs. We don't need a clinical trial for off-label use, okay? And also, Tony, you're wrong. Look at the broad scientific literature. Look outside the United States. Look at what people are doing, not just us, we, okay? So he did mention remdesivir trial, okay? So I almost gave him a D on this because he's like, okay, yeah, we admitted that some science was going on, but he failed on understanding. The efficacy signal, we already have it. Read the literature. Read the expert statement from China. He's going to talk about other therapeutics now. Next, he's going to mention a few that we already know work based on other experiences in other countries who are shutting this down, and watch what he has to say about them.
Plasma transfusions, immune globulin, those kinds of things, monoclonal antibodies, they're all going to be going into testing.
Okay. When I meant about the randomized control,
they already are in testing, and the results are fabulous. This is an F- on therapeutics for Tony. And not to mention high-dose vitamin C, okay? And I know a lot of people that follow me are going, yes, he mentioned it. Intravenous vitamin C. What was it? 300 tons? I forget. There's a huge tonnage of the right type of vitamin C for intravenous use that China ordered and was shipped to China. And we're just going to do some testing and see if that works. Okay.
We don't have the results to those studies yet, because that's why it's difficult to pick a front runner.
We don't have the results.
Yeah.
The N is not big enough yet. When we get a big enough N, we'll know.
Absolutely.
What's the size of the population of China that's not infected as a result of what they did? That's your N.
Empowered. Young people, they seem to be more affected, or at least that's what the media is telling us here in the United States. Is that true? And if so, why here more than in China?
That's a good question. Everybody knows that the original China data made it look like young people virtually never got involved in a serious way. Then as we start getting into Italy, looking a little bit more like us, France, European countries, and ourselves, we're starting to see individuals in their 30s and 40s. Now, if you look at them, still, many of them have underlying conditions, even though they're 30 or 40. They have diabetes, they have hypertension, they have things like that. But if you look closely, you will see that there are young people who are otherwise well, who can get seriously ill. So we need to forget this, that if you're young, you're good to go, you have no problem. There are two issues with younger people you need to...
That I'll agree with, and that's been the truth, and that's what the data from China actually showed. Data from China actually showed a linear relationship with every day of life you have an increased risk. It's a linear relationship. It's not 0, 0, 0, 0, okay, oops, you're 60 and it jumps up. It's a linear relationship between how old you are and the risk of death, and so a significant proportion of deaths occur in people that are under the age of 10, under the age of 20, under the age of 30. And so on this point, I got to give him an A. He's saying, let's do away with the idea that this is not going to affect kids. Now, there are people that are saying, yeah, but he's only saying that because that's where they would put the mandatory vaccine, because it's easier to pass mandatory vaccinations with children. Well, maybe that's what bias allows him to see that point, but he can't see these other points. He's walking around on this planet, running around like a maniac, like he said, with this bias filter that is vaccine first, vaccine first, vaccine first. Okay? And maybe that's what allows him to get an A on actually reporting the accurately the data on the age distribution of mortality. So on that one, I have to give him an A.
A, you need to avoid infection, just like everybody else, not only for your own health, but even if you get trivially involved, you can be a vector that would ultimately infect someone who does have a real risk of serious conditions. It's kind of like the young, healthy 25-year-old gets infected, goes home, infects grandma and grandpa, or a 40-year-old uncle who has metastatic disease on chemotherapy. That's the problem.
There's been some talk about the possibility of reinfection with COVID-19. Now, do you think that this is more an issue with testing, that the test remains positive, or are they truly being infected for a second time with the virus?
You know, I don't know the answer to that 100%, but I would be willing to bet on my experience, and I'll bet your experience, that any virus that you have, if you do well, recover and clear the virus, if it acts like any other virus, you're going to have lasting immunity. Sure. You're not going to.
This is Anthony Fauci, who made his career on HIV. Reinfection has been empirically demonstrated with COVID-19, with SARS-2, in China and in other countries. If it acts like any other virus, it's a huge assumption. And the reason why he wants us to think that, hey, if you get the infection, you're probably going to be immune to it, you're going to be fine, is because that is a layup for, if you have antibodies from a vaccine, then you're probably going to be fine too. My research, which is a deep dive research into the proteins of this virus, show me that every immunogenic epitope that's encoded by the proteins in this viral genome has matches to important key proteins. And a third of those matches are to proteins in the immune system. It's inconceivable to me, he says. That's called argument from authority, and that's a fallacy. Okay, now I'll give him a little bit of credit of saying, okay, well, this is, I'm not 100% sure. But he's way, way, way off in terms of actually looking at the situation from other countries, looking at the reports, the clinical reports, the case reports from other countries, and he's way, way off to make this overarching assumption that if it's like any other virus. Okay, there's still no vaccine against HIV, as was promised. Billions of dollars were pumped into it. Now it's managed by Therapeutics. It's overstating this case.
Reinfected.
Yeah, the way that I've thought about it is there's certain illnesses where you get lifelong immunity, chicken pox, measles with your 2 vaccinations. So maybe this won't be lifelong immunity.
Hold it. You don't get lifelong immunity from the MMR against measles. Okay.
To say there's none where you can get reinfected in 2 weeks, something seems off.
No, that's inconceivable to me that that's the case. Okay. I mean, you're going to have some degree of durable immunity. You're right. It may not be 50 years, but it's certainly going to be a matter of a few years.
Sure.
Right.
For myself as a healthcare provider, this is something my hospital system even asked me to ask you. When is it safe for us to return to work once we've either tested positive for COVID-19 or, with a lack of testing kits, had an upper respiratory viral illness where we don't know if it was COVID-19? When can we return? Is it when fever subsides, 24 hours after fever subsides, or do we do a full 14-day or 21-day quarantine?
If you are a healthcare provider or someone who is in a critical infrastructure and you need to get back to work, to assume that you're infected, what you can do is that you can wear a mask, take your temperature daily, monitor yourself. If you get symptoms, get out of circulation. If not, assume you're infected, but do it in a way where you don't infect anybody else. Otherwise, every one of our healthcare providers are getting exposed every day. They can't assume they're infected. They've just got to go to work. And that's one of the things we're going to be recommending.
Makes sense.
No. First of all, it was the wrong question. The right question is, how soon can we get back to work? Let's say, he said, Dr. Mike said, once you test positive. No, how about once you test negative? The IPAC Back to Work plan is very sensible. And I'm going to direct everyone to ipaknowledge.org. Okay? Tony Fauci wants people to, in the healthcare movement, in the healthcare setting, to just go back to work because you have to. On March 25th, 2020, I wrote a letter to Secretary Alexander Azars, the IPAC COVID-19 Put America Back to Work program, and I strongly recommended the use of validated in-home testing with lateral flow antibody assays, such as those produced by Biomedomics. This is the company from South Korea. Again, I have no financial interest whatsoever in the country. If you're symptomatic, excuse me, you need 2 negative tests 1 week apart, and then you go back to work. For all people with past diagnosis, you need 1 negative test after being asymptomatic for at least 5 days. So that's an overt diagnosis, where that presume means that you test positive once. Then you need 1 negative test after being asymptomatic for at least 5 days. Because once you test positive, then you know that your immune system's working on the virus, and we presume that you're not going to be shedding it sometime after that. Now, I understand that it could be shed by fecal matter something like 14 days afterwards. This is a nightmare. It's got a 4 to 5 day symptomatic period, and then you're shedding it for 14 days afterwards. There's a feline coronavirus that has the same characteristic. No, it doesn't mean that this is a chimeric bioweapon. Asymptomatics who've been in contact with a COVID-19 case, that's you're asymptomatic, but you've been in contact. These are the people, okay, you need 2 negative results 1 week apart. Now, how are we supposed to have a healthcare infrastructure for doing that? In-home testing, constant testing. Can't do that because the CDC messed up their test, right? Let's get these antibody assays, take all the money that was going to go to the vaccine and make tests and therapeutics and be done with it, okay? I urgently recommend the final, okay, if you're asymptomatic, you're never in contact with a COVID-19 case, you've never been tested, you need 2 negative results 5 days apart. These tests are about $100 each. And as mass production takes foot, they can come down as low as $10 a piece. So in the final recommendation, I urge prophylactic antivirals. That's not what FDA recommends, but I recommend prophylactic antivirals specifically so that if you are still infectious, you have shut down your viremia as low as possible after you test negative before you go back to work. They don't have a plan. Their plan is stall until we get a vaccine that looks impressive, with no guarantee that the vaccine is going to be safe, because it's a spike protein that can induce pathogenic priming and make us all at higher risk of autoimmune disorders, pulmonary immunopathology that has an autoimmune component in our lungs. Very, very deadly.
That brings me to the topic of personal protective equipment, N95 masks. As recently as last week, my hospital was in need of these donations. I actually went on a journey to purchase $50,000 worth of masks myself from construction workers and was able to donate them. Why do you think there's such a shortage? Obviously,
I want to give it up to Dr. Mike. That's a stand-up thing to do. Absolutely. Well done. Very well done. Good job. More people need to do that. Elon Musk is retrofitting his factories to make ventilators. There's a lot of people pulling together like this. Okay? If you are a philanthropist, please don't donate to the CDC for a vaccine. Donate to testing, in-home testing, and therapeutics, please.
There's huge demand because we need to constantly be using these masks. New York Presbyterian Hospital System, they use 40 to 70,000 masks a day. But do you also think there's an issue of hoarding here, or some sort of customs issue of getting these masks shipped over?
It's a combination of all of the above. So one of the things that we really got to get away from was we got to make testing in a way that doesn't have the tester consume PPE. PPE should be for the people who are taking care of sick patients. And right now, we've got to have a system where a person can self-stick the swab in, put it in the vial, give it to somebody, and nobody puts PPE on, so you don't waste it. That's the first thing. The second thing, we've got to keep manufacturing it at a very, very high level. I mean, there was no anticipation that it would be so many people would need this. So we've got to get people who don't need it to not use it. We got to get a lot more for the people who need it.
There was no anticipation. I can point to no fewer than 20 papers that have been written over the past 10 years that have said that an outbreak like this is inevitable, that this was known to be coming. And the conspiracy theorists will say, well, wait a minute, they made it happen. And I love some conspiracy theorists with my whole heart, that they will interpret everything that is happening as a hostile takeover, globalism, they want our guns, et cetera, et cetera. And you know who I'm talking about, and you know I love you to a person. But the reality is that viruses can kill. The reality is that there are dangerous viruses in this world. And the reality is We saw this coming, big time. There was a simulation that was done in November. How did he say that it was not anticipated? They ran simulations year after year after year over what it would look like. And it takes nothing to calculate what an exponentially growing virus in the United States would require. So, yeah, I know I might be nitpicking a point, but there's this attitude that is so damaging to any progress that's just, oh, well, just toss it off. Nobody saw this coming. He's full of excuses. And if you look at the CDC testing fiasco video that I did, there's nothing but one excuse after the other. Nothing happened. Something happened, but it just happened. Nobody was responsible, kind of thing. Wrong.
Those types of quick testing, for point of care testing, for those rapid tests, do you see that coming sooner rather than later? For us in the family practice setting, we have the influenza swabs that in 15 minutes we have an answer. Is there something like that on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I was at I go to these task force meetings at the White House every day.
Yep.
I was at one last evening. That was a topic of conversation. How are we going to scale these up and get these going? I can't give you a time frame, but there's a lot of enthusiasm about getting the private sector to really scale that up.
America and Italy.
America, don't listen to Anthony Fauci. America, the FDA has approved 18 given emergency use authorizations to 18 companies in the private sector to make tests. He can't give you a time frame for when an antibody lateral flow assay is going to be available. Go to biomedomics.com. It was available last month. Order them from South Korea. Start using them, but send your people home. Don't make them come in to test. I agree. For the consumptions of PPEs, yes, we don't want somebody to have to swab somebody else, right? I created or was creating a rapid assay for Ebola. And the people would be given a plastic bag with a vial in it in the airplane, in the backseat of the airplane, and they would put the vial in their mouth, and the wick would there would be a wick that would wick the saliva into the vial. They would put it back in and close it, and then some sanitary pads, okay, to wash their hands, kill the virus. This is when the CDC wanted to do blood draws in the airport to do PCR testing. That was their solution for Ebola. Stop listening to Anthony Fauci. The tests exist. Order them. LA County just ordered 20,000 of them. We need in-home testing, not point-of-care testing. Don't look for point-of-care testing. That is a mistake because people bring the virus to the hospital, or they go to the hospital, they get the virus, and they bring it home. Have we lost our mind on social distancing on this thing? This is crazy. In-home testing, $100 a pop.
To be disproportionately affected to other nations that are even closer to Wuhan, China, which seems to be the epicenter, the original epicenter of this virus. Why do you think that this happened here in the U.S. and in Italy so much so than other nations?
Well, I think because people travel here and travel to Europe and Italy a lot, I think we really saved ourselves a real bad bullet, if you want to call that, by very quickly shutting down the influx of cases from China. And then something that was very controversial, you might remember, when we shut down influx from Europe, because, Europe is the new China. There's some numbers that you may be aware of that are really extraordinary. About 60% of all the infections now, if you talk about New York City, how we're getting influx from other countries, particularly China. That's how New York got hit so badly. New York, I'm a New Yorker, in case you haven't figured it from my accent. But about 56% of the new infections right now in our country are in New York City. New York City has more than half of the action. It's a big city. It's a robust city. People come and go. I think that's the reason why the United States is getting hit, because of the kind of country.
Let's roll back the clock to the beginning, before there was a single tested case of COVID-19 in the United States. We had people in all the countries of the world, all of them. We had people on the Princess cruise ship. The State Department made a commitment to every American citizen that come home from the countries, and if you're going to be tested. With what? CDC's flawed test. That's why we're at 1 million cases in the United States today. We should be at 2,000 or 3,000 cases. All the things that Fauci said earlier, testing, contact tracing, shutting it down if you're efficient. This all falls on the lap of the CDC for designing a test that was flawed so that they could have primacy over testing. And all these other tests that are out there that are probably more accurate, they have to be sent to CDC for validation, the results, at least 5 cases. See, Dr. Fauci is telling you half-truths here. He's telling you that the cases came from overseas, but he's not telling you that we had control of those people. All of those people had to have the approval of the State Department. They were in the airports. You come in the airport and you say, okay, I came in from overseas, whatever. Okay, you go over there. Okay, and we're going to test you with a 15-minute test. That's what should happen. That's what should have happened. That's what can happen now of people moving around. Okay. There's a lot of people that are going to say, I don't want the government knowing where I am. I don't want to be tested, so and so and so. Okay, fine. If we don't have testing, it's testing and therapeutics or a vaccine. Take your choice. That's where we're at with this thing. Okay.
It makes sense. And I live a few blocks away from Times Square. My windows actually look at Times Square, and I think there's also a statement of something to celebrate the fact that there's so much solidarity. This past Saturday, 9 p.m., there wasn't a soul in Times Square. The fact that we are coming together and doing the social distancing is not something talked about in media, and I think it should be highlighted. We are doing a good job, especially under these crazy circumstances. Would you agree?
I totally agree. I was going to say I am amazed, but that's the wrong word. I am impressed.
Proud.
I shouldn't be amazed. I shouldn't be amazed because the American spirit is amazing.
Yeah.
But in fact, what I see here in Washington, D.C. is the same thing. I mean, people are doing things in a calm way that I just think is wonderful.
For sure.
Really is.
Agree. And my final question is, any guidance for us as physicians, and what role do you think it plays in filling out death certificates? I filled these out before for my patients when I've done death pronouncements as a resident. If a patient has CHF, they come in with a congestive heart failure exacerbation, but they also have a viral illness at the time. What should go on the death certificate? Is it clinical judgment, and what role do you think that plays in the numbers?
I think it's going to influence the numbers. I think you've got to make it clear. If someone obviously goes into it with the acute respiratory distress syndrome and dies on a ventilator, that's coronavirus disease.
Sure.
You got to make sure it gets onto the death certificate.
Okay. Yeah, because I've seen countries that have been having low numbers of COVID-19 mortality, but then their numbers of pneumonia cases spike, and are you just changing what's on the death certificate there, and that's impacting those numbers?
Right.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Fauci. Very much appreciated.
Okay, so this is the question of died with versus died from. And I have to give Anthony Fauci an A+ on this. This is exactly right. If a person had a pre-existing heart condition, high blood pressure, if they had pre-existing other conditions that in which those people, in which clinical symptoms or clinical diagnoses that have a higher death rate from COVID-19, it's a COVID-19 death. Now, the detractors of Tony Fauci and vaccination will say, but that's going to amplify the number of deaths. They didn't die from the vaccine. They died from their congestive heart failure. They didn't die from the vaccine. They died because they were over 80. They didn't die from the vaccine because they smoked. They didn't die from the vaccine because, they died because they smoked. This is a very important message. If you die with a COVID-19 infection and it exacerbates your situation, if you were not going to die from that infection, if you were not going to die from your pre-existing condition and the infection pushed you over the top, that's a COVID-19 death. Were it not for the virus, you would not have died that day, that week, that month. Why? Because that's what we're arguing for with vaccines. Oh, they have a pre-existing condition. We'll remove them from the study. And so vaccines are perfectly safe for everybody. They only kill the people that they would have killed, but they had other conditions. You can't cherry pick when you apply this logic. If you apply the same logic that we want to apply to vaccine injury deaths, this person, but for the vaccine, would have not died. This person, but for the virus, would not have died. Then we can know the scope and the scale of the morbidity and the mortality that the CDC's fuck up on their tests caused on the United States population. That's why we need to count them accurately, okay? It all traces back to the CDC's test and the stupid push for a vaccine that might not even work. It's a false promise, and so I'm going to first give the overall grading here, and then we're going to look at some of the things that I said a month and a half ago. So on Unbreaking Science here, we're grading Tony Fauci. On the overall plan, I'm going to give him an F. It's absolutely the wrong plan, right? He wants to let people go out and mingle in towns where there's not enough cases yet, so they can get more cases. Testing, the first time you mentioned it, F. Why? Because every time he talks about testing, he's talking about an RT-PCR test. He's talking about looking at the tests from the perspective of a medical thing that you do in a medical facility, putting people at risk of exposure. All right. I'm grading Fauci F on testing, mostly because 90% of what he has said outside the context of this interview has been excuses as towards why we don't have an accurate test. So far as I know, I still haven't seen the sensitivity and specificity or ROC curves for CDC's test. All right. Opening up too early, that's his plan. He's warning people not to open up too early if they follow his plan. That's what he's telling them to do. So he gets an F. This is one of these statements where it's like a CYA, cover your ass. Well, I'm going to tell you to open up your towns, but don't do it too early. I'm going to advise against you opening it too early. So tell us exactly the date when we can do that. Well, you need accurate testing. Therapeutics, F, obviously. He has no clue about the power of therapeutics, and the FDA agrees with me on that. Reinfection, F. He has no idea what people know about reinfection. Okay, it is dangerous to get the injection. It's dangerous to get the infection. We don't want reinfection. We need to eradicate this as by all means possible, not at any cost possible. We're going to talk about cost in a minute. Return to work. His plan is a disaster. His plan will bring about more and more cases. The IPAC back to work plan is sensible. Uses in-home testing. Takes 15 minutes, and you're back to work. On another aspect of testing, he got it he got it right that you don't want to consume PPEs. You want some form of testing where you hand the person the swab. So on that part, handing the person the swab, he got an A+. Point of care testing, he only gets a C. He kind of getting the idea that we probably don't want to expose people who are testing, but it's mostly over resource use for PPEs. Shutting down borders, absolute F. It's an absolute misrepresentation. It was not a success. We didn't shut down the borders because, we stopped people who were not U.S. citizens from coming home, coming to the United States. We let the people U.S. citizens, but even if they were tested, their testing was flawed with the CDC test, and many were false negatives. He didn't tell you the whole truth on that. The died from and died with, yes, absolutely. Right? We need to know that which exact people are dying from COVID-19, and if a vaccine exacerbates an existing cause, the NVICP gives you an award. So that's seen as an exacerbation. This virus causes pneumonia. You die from double pneumonia, but you had congestive heart failure. That's COVID-19. So his overall plan, I'm going to grade him as an F. Testing is an F. Therapeutics is an F. Point of care testing is a C. Shutting down borders, died from, died within. He's somewhere around a C minus in my calculations, maybe just a D. So we'll give him the benefit of the doubt for some of the things that he said. But I so wanted to give him an F, but I'm going to be objective about this and give him a C minus. I want to talk about now things that he's not telling you. Things that he's not telling you. He's all about the vaccine, and so a few moons ago, I put together the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine recommended readings, immunization with inactivated MERS. Okay. These are spike protein studies. This is at my blog, jameslyons-weiler.com. These vaccine recommended readings. They show the pathogenic priming happening. And there's other studies that have been sent to me. I haven't had time to update this. But if you want some references for pathogenic priming, aka immune enhancement, go there. Excuse me, at jameslyons-weiler.com. And then the other thing I want to point to is this article that I wrote a couple of weeks ago now, on the 13th of this month. And I did this modeling. And I'm going to go over the modeling again here since I have your attention, so that we can understand the power of therapeutics combined with accurate testing. If you do no social distancing and no treatment, you have a problem. I'm sorry, if you do very slight social distancing, you have this exponential curve, and we don't want that. So if we increase social distancing, it's not enough. Social distancing doesn't get us there. 98% social distancing, you enter a steady state. That's not what we want either. A steady state just holds on for a long time until they say, okay, now we have a vaccine. Well, that will cost us $4, $8, $16 trillion in our economy to hold on for 18 months. It's a disaster. Social distancing with a little bit of 99% will shut it down. If we absolutely lock everybody down, I can't see the time scale, but this is becoming important, so I'm going to bring it up myself. If we do social distancing and lock everybody down without any treatment, yes, we get there, but after fluctuations back and forth in number of cases, but the total number of cases are remarkably low. Okay, so we have to have kind of a zero tolerance policy for this, and remarkably low, like 1,800. It peaked at 1,800 after, we didn't know about the virus for 18 days. 99% social distancing eventually eradicates it, but after 200 days, about 200 days, 180 days. What would 180 days do to the U.S. economy? We can't have that. It's not going to work. Okay, so now let's add some treatment. That 37% treatment, 60% moderate social distancing. We start to see, we have an effect, but it's still exponential. Sorry, it's bouncing all over. It's kind of a challenge to control this. Social distancing, 60% with treatment of 38%. Okay. Social distancing is 60% with treatment of 39%. Okay, we're getting there. Social distancing at 45%. Okay, that's 60% social distancing. Social distancing of 60% with treatment of 50%, and we're done in 60 days. We've been at this for 60 days. We could have started treating 60 days ago. We could have started using prophylactic treatment. The social distancing 60% with high amounts of treatment, 90% treatment, we're done in 25 days. So the FDA, thank goodness, have brought on antivirals. Now, what I want to encourage the FDA to do next, and I want to encourage all of the public to do next, is to use anything that might help but won't hurt. That's the policy that we should have right now, because the health and welfare of our population is at risk, but the survival of our nation is at risk. People who are saying this is conspiracy theory, that it's just going to go away all of its own magically once they get the vaccine. You're in a struggle to survive as a nation right now. I can't emphasize that enough. And this guy, Anthony Fauci, and the CDC are a genuine threat to public health, a genuine threat to our mental health, a genuine threat to our economic health, and a genuine threat to our national survival.